All right, let's jump right into a story that is just fascinating. It's a real-life scientific mystery, and it's all about one of the weirdest, most wonderful creatures on the planet. And you'll see it really makes you rethink what it takes to save a species from disappearing forever. And that right there, that's the big question we're tackling today. I mean, on paper, every scientific measurement said these animals should be long gone, but they weren't. They were doing great. So how on earth did they pull it off? We're going to dig into the evidence and solve what's called the Platypus Paradox. So to get our heads around this, we need a bit of backstory. We all know the platypus is, well, it's a one-of-a-kind animal. But in the state of South Australia, this amazing icon just vanished. And to understand how a small group survived in a man-made pond, we've got to first understand what went so wrong out in the wild. I mean, just look at this timeline. It's staggering how quickly things went downhill. For a while there, they were common. But in just a handful of decades, they were completely wiped out from the state's rivers. It was this perfect storm of farming, cities growing, and new predators they just couldn't handle. And poof, by the 1940s, they were gone. But, and this is where things get really interesting, a tiny group of just 6 platypuses managed to hold on. They were moved to a place called Warrawong Sanctuary. And this wasn't some beautiful, untouched natural river. Nope. It was completely artificial, totally enclosed, and this, against all odds, is where they would make their last stand. So scientists, naturally, wanted to know what the secret sauce was. How were they surviving? They went in and treated this sanctuary like a full-blown crime scene, searching for clues in the water, among the plants, and deep in the food chain. And when you look at what Warrawong actually is, it's pretty clear this is no natural paradise. Think of it less like a river and more like a giant, super complex aquarium. The water's pumped in, there's a big fence around the whole thing, and even the plants were picked because they were tough, not because they belonged there. This was a completely controlled environment. Okay, so the investigation had 3 main parts. First, they looked at what was growing there. Second, they tested the water itself. What chemicals were in it? Was it clear or murky? And third, the really crucial part, they checked the food supply. Was there enough of the little critters that platypuses love to eat? The answers, they thought, would explain everything. But, and you probably saw this coming, when the lab results started rolling in, things just didn't add up at all. The clues weren't pointing to a healthy home. They were pointing to a disaster zone. And this is where our mystery gets really deep. Just check out these numbers. The levels of nitrates and phosphates, the stuff you find in fertilizer runoff, were off the charts. We're talking more than 20 times higher than what's considered healthy for an ecosystem. The water was also super murky. By every official standard, this water was poor quality, period. Now, to check out the food situation, they use this really cool tool called a signal score. Basically, it works like this. You look at the tiny bugs and creatures living in the water. Some of those little guys are really sensitive and can only live in super clean water. Others are tough as nails and can live almost anywhere. So, if you find a bunch of the tough guys and none of the sensitive ones, you know you've got a pollution problem. A lower score is bad news. And the score for this supposed sanctuary? A measly 3.61. Now, to put that into perspective, a score that low it's just awful. It's literally the worst possible category. It screams severe pollution. That's the kind of score you'd expect to find in an industrial drain pipe, not a place that's supposed to be a safe home for an animal as special as a platypus. So we're back to this huge paradox, right? The scientific data is basically shouting, this place is polluted, the water's bad, the food web looks like a disaster. So how in the world are these platypuses not just surviving, but actually having babies for 20 years? Well, the answer wasn't in what the scientists found inside the sanctuary. It turns out the solution to this whole puzzle was about changing your perspective. The real secret wasn't that the habitat was perfect. The secret was that it was safe. It was a fortress. And this right here, this is the whole story. On one side, you've got all the things that killed off the wild platypuses, and on the other, you see how Warrawong was basically a fortress against every single one of them. That fence kept out deadly predators. Because the water was pumped in, there was no new pollution from farms or cities. The banks were solid, no one was fishing there, and they never had to deal with a crazy flood or a terrible drought. All the big killers were locked out. And hey, don't just take my word for it. The scientists who did the study put it perfectly. They said the system was minimally influenced by external factors. In other words, they built a protective bubble around these platypuses, shielding them from all the stuff that made life in the wild impossible. So at the end of the day, what Warrawong offered was a good enough home. Was it perfect? Absolutely not. But it had everything they really needed. Water that was always there, a steady supply of food, even if it was just tough little bugs, good banks to dig their burrows, places to hide, and, the most important thing of all, freedom from those major threats. And the proof is in the pudding, as they say. Look at this. Those original 6 platypuses, they didn't just survive. They started a family. They had at least 5 babies that we know of, born and raised right there in that polluted pond. The population was actually growing. This wasn't just survival. This was a success. Okay, so this is a really cool story about one little pond, right? But what does it mean for the bigger picture of conservation? Well, it actually has some pretty huge implications. Well, for one, it tells us that the platypus is one heck of a resilient animal. It's way tougher than we might have thought. It can actually handle conditions that are pretty far from ideal, just as long as it's safe from those huge, overwhelming dangers. You give it a fighting chance, and it will take it. And this, I think, is the really big takeaway here. Maybe, just maybe, the goal of conservation isn't always about trying to turn back the clock and build a perfect, pristine ecosystem from scratch. Maybe a smarter, more achievable goal is to focus on creating safe havens, these protected bubbles that get rid of the biggest threats and just give resilient species the space they need to bounce back. And that kind of leaves us with this big question to chew on, doesn't it? In a world that's, well, not getting any wilder, what's the real goal? Is it chasing an impossible standard of perfection? Or is a well-protected, safe, good enough world the real secret to survival?